using consensus and discernment. Let's look and see if we can dig into that a little bit more. If you turn in your books, these books, to page 39, you will see at the top of that it talks about discernment. Now we've already talked a little bit about consensus, but what is discernment? And I want to read that first paragraph to you because I think that is a beautiful picture of what discernment looks like. Discernment is simply looking for God's guidance in a situation. It means listening for God's voice and seeking direction as you make plans for the work of mission and ministry. When you use discernment, you are trying to see the heart of the matter with spiritual eyes. I love that last sentence. When you use discernment, you are trying to see the heart of the matter with spiritual eyes. Discernment is not, let me figure out what I want to do and then get everybody on my side. Discernment is looking at the situation that we are faced with. And first of all, did you guys hear the word listening? It's first listening. Before we tell God the things that are in our heart, let's listen to the things that are in His heart. Let's look at this situation from His point of view. And then we can begin, through this conversation that we are having with Him, we begin to understand His point of view, not try to convince Him of our point of view. So that's discernment. So then if you turn the page, the next page talks a little bit, on page 41, you can see once again, consensus means a general agreement or harmony among a group of people. And it points out in that second sentence, when there is consensus among the members of a group, it creates a cooperative dynamic. A cooperative dynamic. That it's not this win or lose mentality, but it's something that we work together to achieve for the benefit of the team. So what does it look like in terms of a decision-making meeting, a decision-making environment, to come to a consensus where we have all been discerning God's will for this situation? What is that? What is, practically speaking, what does that look like, and how do we do it? Because don't you long for the day where you send out an agenda to everybody on your team and you say, okay, pray about this, see if you can discern what God is leading us to do, and then they all come in and say exactly the same thing? I mean, that would be awesome if it worked that way all the time, right? But it doesn't. And so how do we develop a consensus in terms of when we are gathering together for a meeting? There is, on page 40, there's a great process for discernment outlined in that, on that page. And I want to just kind of hit the highlights of that really quickly. So the process of discernment, the first thing is to frame it. Clearly state the question, whatever it is that you are trying to discern. Now, if you guys are underliners in your book, I'm an underliner in my book, I underlined the phrase, clearly state the question. Because a lot of times we come into a meeting and we think we know what we're talking about, but we're talking about something that's surface level. We're not really talking about root causes. So we talk about change that we want to see on the outside, but we're not really looking at the change that needs to happen on the inside under the surface. So really frame the question, frame the situation, and look at it clearly to make sure you're not just dealing with the top surface level stuff, that you're dealing with the root issue. And then grounding. Select and state guiding principles, beliefs, and values that the group may revisit at any point in the discernment process. So you're gonna remind yourself of the heart principles. Or you're going to remind yourself, hey, this is the agenda, and this is how we're going to move through this. This is how we're going to make this decision. This is who's going to make this decision. This is how we're going to approach this particular topic. And you talk about that. You remind yourself of core values that your church has. Remember, we want to remember that these are our core values, that whatever we decide fits in with those core values. Remind yourself of your mission. Remind yourself of your vision, whatever that is that needs to dictate whatever solution you guys come up with, okay?
Would that be, I'm sorry to put in, would
No,
that
go
be
ahead.
similar to like Robert's Rules of Order, you know, kind of remind everybody, keep everybody focused on what.
That can be, yes, that can be a part of it, but I would also say to add to that some sort of bigger vision. Because a lot of times I think we look at a small scenario and we figure out how to solve the small scenario without being reminded that that is part of something much bigger. So we do want to talk about heart principles and how we communicate, but we also want to remember what's the big thing that this small thing is going to support. It helps us to be reminded of the holistic view of our ministry and our mission. Shedding. Here's the thing that we don't often do in a meeting that I think is so valuable. Bring prejudices, false assumptions, predetermined desires or conclusion, and ego defenses or concerns to light and lay them aside. This is the elephant in the room, okay? This is what you talk about before you talk about all the rest of this stuff. What is it that I bring to the table that can get in the way of creating consensus, that can get in the way of my ability to discern? Let's go ahead and talk about it. Because if we don't talk about it, then we let this elephant guide the whole rest of our decision-making process. And I'm going to tell you what, the elephant does not want what God wants for us. And so we need to go ahead and figure out what is it that's going on within me, what is it that's going on within the group, what are the things that we need to shed and get rid of before we move forward. Rooting. Relate the subject in question to biblical text, images, stories of your own religious tradition. So what is it that God says about this? And what do we know about this from the Bible? What do we know about this from what we know about God and who He is and His character? Listening. This involves everything from silent prayer, conducting research, asking others, sharing experiences. We want to listen. Now, it means listening within the context of your meeting, but that can also mean bringing in the opinions of others that you have been listening to. So Nita mentioned, hey, sending out an agenda in advance. What if you said, hey, this is the thing that we're going to be talking about. Talk to 5 people and see what they say about the matter, and then bring that into the group. And then you're going to be able to share, hey, this is what I've heard from different people who may be involved, either in the community, in our church, wherever it is. So listening. Exploring. Use the power of imagination to identify all the possible directions or options and examine them in the light of the grounding principles. I love this, that you're identifying all the possibilities. Not just the ones that you've done before that worked in the past, but all the possibilities. And then you take all those possibilities and you say, oh, remember that big idea that we talked about, the thing that we said was really important, our big vision, our big goal? Well, how do all of these things lead toward that? It's going to help you eliminate the things that actually work against your big mission when you look at those and align those with your big vision. Improving. Select the best possible options from the exploring segment and then improve them. Say, oh, well, that was a great idea, that was a great idea. Sometimes you can combine 3 great ideas to create the best idea. So you move through this process of improving. And then weighing. Select options based on the preferences of the group. Test them using practical judgment, reason, intuition. We can say, if we did this, what would happen? Let's talk about that. If we did this, what would be some stumbling blocks that might occur with this option? Or what would be some benefits of each of these options? And we begin to test it and kind of test run through it in our minds. Closing. Close the discussion and establish the direction or decision. How many times have you guys left a meeting and you were like, what just happened? Because you just didn't close it. You didn't get that closure. Like somebody leaves and says, well, I think this is what happened, and somebody else says, well, I think this is what happened, and I think this is what was decided, and somebody else says, I don't know what just happened. So if we just do the simple thing of, this is what I've heard, this is where we're leaving it, and this is the direction moving forward, then everybody has a common understanding of what has just happened. And then resting. I love that this is a step in the process. Let your decision rest for a bit to see whether it brings a sense of peace, Sometimes what happens in the resting phase is that other circumstances can come up, or you discover something new that you didn't consider, or whatever, and then you're able to bring that back around and be able to revisit and refine and once again improve. But too often I think we're like, oh, we made that decision, let's move on. And we don't stay open to how God may still be moving and forming and shaping the thing that we're doing. Okay? So here's what I want for you guys to do. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to work together with your table, okay, to develop an agenda for a meeting. All right? Now, you can use some of these, the process for discernment. You can use some other things that you have just stored away in your own memory, some ideas. But we're going to come up with just a fictional scenario, okay? That someone has brought up to you the fact that, or several people have come to you and said, we would like to start a ministry in our church for homeless people in our community. And it's your job to put together an agenda to help people work through this process of discernment and then creating a consensus around what you should do. So I want you guys to think, how do you start the meeting? Keeping in mind what Nita said about Christian conferencing and having spiritual elements, what would you do to start the meeting? And then what kinds of questions would you ask? How would you ask some questions that would identify the elephant in the room before you get started? So how would you lead that meeting? How long does it need to be? How many things do you think need to be accomplished in the first meeting before you call another meeting? So think about all of those kinds of things. It could be that your first meeting just has a couple of these steps, and then your second meeting might need to take place and have a couple more of those steps. So I'll give you guys about 15 minutes to work together as a group and to talk about what that agenda would look like. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I have a commercial break before we actually start the next little segment. How many of you have a smartphone? How many of you have at least one Bible on your smartphone? If you don't, put one on your smartphone. They're very handy. Because you always have your phone with you, right?
Yep.
So the next time you go in the doctor's office and you're going, that magazine is 4 years old. Well, that's your Bible.
And it's about football.
Not the game.
No, the Bible.
You mean there's a Bible game?
See, I don't even look at that phone. I just look up at the first.
Well, if you
Matter of fact, I
want
looked at,
a really good program for Bible on your phone, Olive Tree is great. They give away several free Bibles, and you can buy a number of other versions, and they're actually loaded onto your phone, so you don't have to have access to the internet to
Yeah.
get to them.
What was it called again?
It's called Olive Tree.
Okay.
It's an app, and you download, and you can use their freebies, or you can, and they also have a number of study materials that you can purchase if you want them on your phone.
Thank you.
Anyway,
the other thing I banned all cell phones.
I want to tell you a
being owned
story
in
and then
the
ask
church.
you a question.
Because a lot of it, I do realize it.
Several of us spent yesterday going through the southwest corner of the state. We encountered a bunch of people who have no electricity and have been told that it may be 6 weeks before they get it. Steve's actually in that situation right now. We encountered people entire communities with no home left undamaged. Drove by large swaths of pine trees where every pine tree is broken off at about 8 feet tall. Visited a church that had every shingle on the roof blown off, which means every room in the church has water damage now because it leaked. Saw a parsonage for one of the churches that the storm took a portion of the roof off, and you can walk into one of the bedrooms and see the sky. Mold is already starting to grow. The best thing that's going to happen is they strip that house down to the bare studs, treat for mold, and rebuild. I asked the pastor in this particular parsonage, I said, have your trustees been out here to see this? And she said, yes, but every one of them has damage just like this to their homes. And no one is really sure what the next step is. And with all that we saw yesterday, none of it compares to Mexico Beach, Panama City Beach. None of it compares. I've got friends who live in Panama City Beach who are in Dothan, Alabama right now and don't even know if they have a home to go back to. Why do all of those problems matter to us in this room today? That's one of the reasons. But what about the people who aren't Christians?
They belong to us.
There you go. Here's why those things matter. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That's what matters. And that's what caring ministries are about. And that's what we're about to talk about is caring ministries. But we are called to have compassion. We are called to care for others. And we're not called to judge them about why they are where they are. It'd be very easy to look at the folks at Mexico Beach and say, well, golly, you live right on the beach. Didn't you expect a hurricane at some point? That's not our job. Our job is to make sure that people have food and water and clothing and companionship and an invitation to realize that all of that came because Jesus loves them as much as he loves us, and we love them too. That's caring.
All right, so we are called to care for other people, and you guys know that we are also called to receive care from other people. A lot of times we put ourselves in the story as the hero, remember, and we think about strapping on our capes and getting care, but also we are called to be willing to receive care from other people. One of the things that we talked about a couple of months ago at the chapel with one of our staff days away was this idea of how much we have and how much we have been blessed with. And I know that all of you guys know that you have counted your blessings, especially this week, and how much we have been blessed with. But do you guys know that all of us have been given more than what we need in some areas and less than what we need in other areas? Okay? So here's what I want you guys to think about. There are some Post-it notes at your table. I want each person to get some Post-it notes. I'm not going to tell you how many because it just depends on you, okay? So just pull off a big hunk of Post-it notes, okay? And a pen. And what I want you guys to think about are your own needs, okay? Think about your own needs. Now, we're going to look at two words that are on these chart papers way on the other side of the room over there. One of the chart papers says more all the way down the side, and one of the chart papers says less. Okay? I want you to think about, for you, what do you have that is more than you need? So what is something that you have an excess of? Okay? Maybe you have an excess of time because you retired and you have all this time on your hands. Maybe that it's an excess of time. Maybe you have an excess of relationships and friendships. Maybe you have an excess of shoes in your closet. Maybe you have an excess of food in your pantry, whatever it is. What is your excess? And then less. What do you not have enough of? What do you need? What are your needs? Maybe you need some stronger community. Maybe you need some more food in your pantry. Maybe you need some shoes. Maybe you need a new car. Maybe you need more time to spend with God in your quiet time, whatever it is, okay? So on the more chart, you're gonna take all of your Post-it notes that say the things that you have excess of, that you have more than what you need, and you're gonna put those there, and then on the one that says less, what are the things that you have less than you need that you need for somebody to provide, okay? You guys got it? All right, so go ahead and fill out your Post-it notes. I'm gonna give you like 30 seconds on that because these should be things that are coming to mind, just a few on each one, and then you guys run over there and stick it on the chart. You can do excess.
So to share.
Okay, here's the thing. Your excess is not for you. Have you guys ever thought about that?
Yep.
Like so many times we look at all that we have and we look at our excess and we think it's for us.
Build more barns.
Exactly. But what if your excess is not for you? What if your excess is for someone else? And you're able to look at the things that you have more of, and you're able to look at people who have less of something, and you're able to see, oh, wow, my lack of technology might be met by someone else who has an excess of technology. Or my lack of a car might actually be met by somebody who has an extra car. Or my lack of time might be met by someone who has time that they would like to use in order to get involved with something that I'm doing. What if your excess is not for you? When I start thinking about the things that I have that are excess in my life, when I look at it through that lens and start thinking about it that way, then all of a sudden, it's not just, let me hoard, but it's let me look for opportunities that I can share with the people who might need it. So I begin to look for needs, and I begin to say, hey, what are your needs? And what do I have that can meet that need? And then you say, hey, what are your needs? And then I need to be that kind of leader that is open and honest and willing to admit, this is what I need. Because a lot of times we would rather be the giver than the receiver, right? Mm-hmm. Because somehow that equals some sort of power, that we have something that you need. But if we are a servant leader, then we are both the giver and the receiver. And we can give and receive from each other, because your excess was meant for me, my excess was meant for you. And that's how we are called to care for other people. Not strapping on the cape and coming in and saving the day and then leaving, but we're saying, hey, I have excess in this area, you have excess in this area, how can we all work together in order to meet the needs that God has given all of us, okay? So let's reframe thinking about our needs and the ways that we have been blessed. So Nita's going to come talk to us a little bit about types of care.
How do you care for other people?
Listen,
Pardon?
listen.
Love. Love?
Empathy.
Pray for them? What?
Empathy.
Empathy?
Empathy.
What about asking them what they need?
Seeing where they're at.
Yeah. Find out what they think they need. Let them be the guides, not necessarily what you think you need to give them or do for them. That's judging. So, caring comes in many ways. Bless you. Acts of mercy, which would be prayer, visiting in the prison, serving as a caregiver, visiting the sick, anything like that. Acts of compassion, again, prayer. Caring about someone's spiritual needs, being concerned about the state of their soul. Acts of justice, cultural justice issues, racial, ethical injustice. Ministry of presence, all of these things are things that we do to show that we care. So here's what I want you to do now. There are some cards on your table. See the stack of index cards with the little things clipped together beside them or on top of them? These cards have issues. Church member struggling with anxiety, elementary aged child struggling with fear, elderly man in hospice care, family of men recently arrested for DUI, teenage girl exhibiting signs of poor decision making, homeless man living on the street in your community, young newly married couple struggling, a single mom with 2 young kids struggling to make ends meet. Everybody, choose one of these. Take a minute. Think about how you can care for that person. And then talk around your table and explain how you think you as an individual or the church can care for these people, and be careful and be aware of anything that you might say that might judge the person as to where they are and why they are where they are, and how you can best know what their needs are so that you can meet them. Okay? Take a few minutes and do that.